Yes, morning. I'm Keith Bovey, as you know, clerk at the Worshipful Company, have been for a couple of years now. Before that, I was the group secretary of a fairly large multinational operating in about 100 countries around the world. So lots of governance challenges. Took early retirement and came to work with a bunch of really nice and wonderful people at the Worshipful Company. So looking forward to this morning.
Excellent, Keith. Thank you very much. I myself, Kobus van der Walt, work for an oil and gas company called Sasol. I'm also a member of the membership committee of the Worshipful Company Secretaries and a advisory board member at the South African Chamber of Commerce. So everybody, thank you very much again for making time to attend. Really appreciate that. We recently had the Chartered Governance Institute's annual conference. And what a great conference it was. So I think we would like to take some time today to reflect on some of the topics which came out of the conference. And Sharon, I think starting with you, what surprised and impressed you the most of the conference?
I think there were a couple of things that impressed me, actually. I've been to a number of these big trade style conferences, and they've had struggles of various natures. So not using our typical Zoom links and things, they had a proper event platform. It was pretty seamless. It worked very well. They were very well prepared. They prepared us well before we were attending, because I was one of the kind of sponsors, I suppose you call it. Very, 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 very professional in every aspect. I think the part that really stands out for me, Kobus, is the range of topics they covered, with a lot of names that weren't the usual household names that we see going round and round the circuits. Names I've never heard of, but some of the most impressive people in terms of knowing their subject and knowing what they were talking about themselves. And a range of people from very young and very mature and very competent to people who were more like me, sort of in the latter parts of our career, and extremely knowledgeable, the wise owl, the wisdom of experience that they could talk from. And I have to say, I attended a lot more events than I have ever done in a virtual one, because when you're manning a stand, you don't tend to go into the conferences as regularly or as easily. And this way, I found I could attend myself a lot more than I would normally have done. And I felt a lot closer physically to the speaker than you do when you're in the auditorium itself. So from that perspective, I found it a very enjoyable experience.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Sharon. Definitely incredibly well organized. The format was quite interesting. First time to see a virtual conference, and by all accounts, it went off very, very well.
And the other thing they did well was the ability to do the networking groups. Yeah. You could join a group and you could say, I want to chat to somebody. And they just, as though you'd walked up to a group of people, they just pop you into a group of people. And sometimes you knew nobody, sometimes you knew everybody in the group. And that worked extremely well as well. So it gave you the opportunity to chat, to catch up with people you know, make new friends, share business cards equivalent. And it had the ability to connect with people so that you could get their contact details and things. So I thought it was a really good event management platform that they had chosen.
Compliments, definitely. I think to the entire panel, which of the topics did you find the most instructive or the most critical for company secretaries and governance professionals in 2021 and looking forward into 22? Lorraine, perhaps starting with you.
Thank you. I think the obvious one has to be ESG, because that's such a big thing everywhere, and that came up in several sessions. So there was one particularly on ESG where they had a new MP who'd got a background in working, I think, with an oil company. So he was very knowledgeable, and he was talking about environment and climate change in the broader sense and how that impacts on businesses and what they're hoping to get from COP26 in November. So that was the high level. And then there was a session also on top tips for reporting, and there they were covering they were discussing with a couple of company secretaries what their companies were doing. So I think for the governance professional, it's understanding at the board level what the board needs to be thinking about in terms of climate change and how that's impacting the business, and then how that leads on into reporting and how that can how companies are starting to report. So I think for large listed companies in the UK, they're having to report against the TCFD, which is, I think, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. I think that's the first time I've remembered that. So that was useful. So I think one of them have been reporting against that already, and that was useful experience. And then, just discussing how that was going to impact the reporting in the coming year.
Yeah. Thank you, Lorraine. Rob, any thoughts from your side? Just that pesky mute button.
Thank you. We try and follow the discipline of the webinar and then forget to turn it on again. But for me, I attended day 1 and day 3, and I enjoyed the sessions that I attended. I was unable to attend the second day, unfortunately. I found the session on culture that was on the morning of day 3 very, very engaging, and different concepts and different aspects, both from an academic point of view as well as a practical implementation. And for me, that was really good because it honed in on the aspects of company purpose and values, and people forget and they don't really revisit those aspects. And especially when we think about new directors coming onto the board, or even the company secretary or board secretary, they have to understand the company purpose and how it all ties together, and then keeping the CEO to account in regards to the implementation of the strategic purpose and making sure it's aligned with the values of the business. And I thought for me, that was very interesting, engaging. The first session I attended was the top 10 risks, nothing of major earth-breaking revelations there, but again, just keeping the things so that we keep those risks front and center of our minds, and good to remind ourselves that some of these emerging risks with the fourth industrial revolution and the issues with working from home and hybrid workplaces, these are major issues that are coming up, and areas around shareholder activism and ESG and executive pay, hot topics that can be a minefield for listed companies. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sharon, thoughts from your side? You?
Right. I've now got a voice as well. I'm so used to hosting these things and I never turn myself off. So this time I did. The one session I'd like to just mention quite specifically was a gentleman talking about how do you define independence of mind. So if you look at section 173 of the Companies Act, it's fairly thin on the ground in terms of, so what does that mean? And I thought the 12 points broken up, I think it was into 3 areas, was extremely useful as a framework to define whether somebody is independent of mind. So I would recommend grabbing that set of slides. It really was very, very insightful, very logical, very, I mean, if you had to sit down, you'd probably find most of them yourself. But it's nice to have somebody else have it put together in a framework like that.
That was a presentation, sorry, Sharon, by Sir Andrew Dickerman.
That's him, yes, correct.
Very, very good indeed.
It was really good. And he spoke so easily and so well, and you didn't have to concentrate, you could just absorb. He was a very natural speaker as well. And not too academic, because I'm not an academic, so I found his practical approach to things quite easy to work with. The other things that I found, and I'm just going to dot around the 3 days, were things like talking about being agile as a director, being agile as a company secretary, being agile in the economy, being agile in the board. The word agile came up a number of times in a number of places. Another word that appeared more than once in titles was the word resilience. And I think agile and resilient are two words that we've either failed or succeeded at in the last 18 months as individuals. And we could rank ourselves on the resilience and agile scales of capability to have survived the last year and a half. So I found that focus quite interesting. Another focus, and I'm trying to pick on ones that have not been covered yet already, was artificial intelligence and the reality that this is in the room. It's part of our life as company secretaries, part of our life as directors, and it's how do we embrace that artificial intelligence in a way that it is complementary. And the part that really fascinated me, we talk about bias and we talk about being influenced and how decision making is at risk because of bias, whether it comes from a diversity or comes from our past experiences, whatever that bias comes from. And the speaker is a very knowledgeable young lady, and she spoke about artificial intelligence and how robots are biased. So that absolutely fascinated me. And her rationale for that was that the data sets of certain content is less than data sets of others. So if you look at the white European population, the data set available to the robot is far greater than for the data set of people of color, or black people, brown people, yellow people, whatever you want to call them. And the dichotomy was just, and she used that one as the example, that people, that the robot was biased in favor of the white males because that's where it had the greater data set to work with. And you look at that and you think, oh my God, even a robot. And it takes you back to that concept of it's what we know that we base our decisions on. So the more knowledge we have in something, the more we are going to be influenced by that content. And equally, that is what happens in an artificial intelligence world. So I did have to take that away as one of my major learning points of the day.
And I guess it also speaks to the topic of culture that Rob referred to, that we will see items such as AI, working from home, a decentralized model of working that seems to become the norm of the day, that will get embedded in the corporate culture. And do we as governance professionals and company secretaries actually know how to deal with that from a proper governance perspective?
And legal.
Is the legislation catering for that properly? Rob, I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that. And Lorraine, perhaps you then, after Rob.
Well, of course, I didn't hear the session on AI, and I hadn't realized that robots are biased. So that's very interesting.
Terrifying.
I think the one key thing about data knowledge is that humans are able to apply it through wisdom. Robots is not something that they can learn. Wisdom is not something robots learn. Whereas we as individuals, whether we're a director or board secretary, we have the ability to use wisdom and discretion where maybe robots don't, because the person has to program that individual robot to think a certain way and not take into aspects of emotional intelligence and body language, though some robots apparently can read body language and certain facial features. So it's going to be very interesting. I think as we go into this hybrid model, some boards are very comfortable working in this mixed use aspect, using some people in the room and then having technology so people can dial in. One, it's cheaper, it's easier for people to get to meetings. So the actual cost of running board meetings is significantly less. But also, one of the things that I've noticed from these aspects is that we can see all of the people at one time on the screen, whereas in the board meeting, quite often you would only look at the person that's speaking or possibly scan the room. So you're able to actually pick up on body language and whether or not the actual full board are fully engaged, whether they say it verbally or not. You will see people, you know, hold their lips together, and that's because they don't agree with what's said, and you know, body language. People become quite fidgety once somebody says something that's very close to their heart. So I think going forward, maybe there are going to be options with having these virtual, hybrid, and physical meetings. And then there's an issue there of data, which obviously has come up before GDPR, but data and those things, we have to consider those.
Lorraine?
I think Rob's covered all the points on that particular subject. I'm happy to contribute to something else, but I don't think I've got anything else to say on that. The main legal point on AI was data privacy. So, but there's lots I could say about the board dynamics. There was some very interesting conversations around that, but perhaps we'll come on to that in a moment.
Sharon, final thoughts?
I'm going to pick up, if I may, on the comment Rob made about hybrid meetings. I was in my first hybrid meeting yesterday where about 5 or 6 people were in the room and the rest of us, which was about 15 odd, were on Zoom. It was an absolute and utter disaster. It really did not work. Eventually, all of them in the end either got their laptops out, earpieces in, and sat with the laptop, so they became online with us, or they went back to their offices, out of the boardroom, and went back to their offices and went online with us. So the ability to have 5 people in the room and the rest of us the other way, the sound was appalling, the interaction was appalling, the voice was appalling. We couldn't see them because they're little spots, you know, you've got one tie and you're 5 people in it. I honestly think there's going to have to be a lot of new learning if the hybrid model is going to work. And I think we're going to end up with half of us sitting around the boardroom table looking at our laptops.
That actually leads us very nicely into our next topic. Thank you, Sharon. The virtual platform that the Governance Institute utilized, how did you find that? Lorraine, perhaps starting with you.
I found it excellent, actually. I was really impressed. I loved it that you could go to different sessions, and we've got a fortnight after the conference when we can go back in and watch recordings of the sessions we couldn't attend. I mean, as Sharon referenced earlier on, the programme was impressive in the range of topics it covered, and I was surprised how many of them were of interest to me. So I've not been to the conference for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years. But this year there was an awful lot that I wanted to go to, and I'm still catching up with some of the sessions now. So I think they did that really well. I wonder, you know, going forward, we're sort of thinking about how that might work. Again, if that would work in a hybrid format, and I think that would be something interesting for them. So next year, if it's back in person, I'd say it's almost a shame if you couldn't attend all the sessions. I'm greedy. You really get good value for money if you can attend all of them. And you hope that maybe they'd still film everything and make the recordings available in the same way. That would be good. And the other thing I think was excellent, and I'm not close to the events team organising this, but some of the things I really liked were the little keynotes. So at the beginning and end of the day and after lunch, they'd often have these little keynotes, and one of the AI presentations was one of those. So it was just a really little short, about 15 minutes, when you had somebody talking about, and one was talking about leadership in turbulent times. That was great. AI was another. They had another guy talking about Ipsos polls from Ipsos Mori and where the UK was going currently. So those were all brilliant. Now, whether all of those people would have gone all the way to the Excel Centre for 15 minutes to give a little talk, I don't know. But again, I'm sure they'll have it that, you know, perhaps they'll have those people there on a big screen if they don't have the time in their diaries to get all the way to the conference for those keynotes. But I thought those really added value. And, you know, they were just little snippets, but some really great stuff came out of those.
Sharon, you were both an attendee and a presenter and a stall holder. So how did you experience the platform?
I found the platform actually quite intuitive. I also found the pre-planning by the, I think they called themselves Mic Concierge or something like that, a Mice Concierge, something like that. Yeah, Mice Concierge. They were very well organized. They knew their stuff. So you felt quite relaxed. I mean, I went on 10 minutes before I was needing to, having not practiced and got my way to my stand and my microphone in time. So I found it very intuitive, very, very easy to work with. The ability for people to join your events, to speak to you, to ask you questions, send you messages, link up with you, were all very, very easily done. So you could effectively, like you do on LinkedIn, go and look for somebody, find them, and then connect with them. And that was, I didn't have enough time. So I didn't actually manage to connect with as many people as I'd like to because I was so busy. From a Knowledge Hub point of view, which was a new aspect of the conference that they had this time, and that was where they had a couple of providers like ourselves, and we were each given 6 sessions of half an hour each that we had to present. 3 before the conference started on the Monday, and 3 after the conference ended on the Wednesday. I have to say, at the end of that, I was shattered. But it was a lovely way of meeting a really interesting group of people who engaged, asked questions, and you were talking to, they said, we'll probably get a lot of students to that. We didn't. We actually got most of the people that attended ours actually came from the main function, rather than the freebies that were made available to university students, for example. So that worked extremely well. And from our point of view, the nice thing is I've now got 6 presentations done. I don't have to do any for a while. I can just reproduce those over and over again. As a sponsor, I felt that I got my money's worth because it wasn't an expensive one in comparison to a stand. You had a stand as well. You could put up material easily. You could put up videos, all sorts of bits and pieces. So no, I found it an enjoyable experience. And I look at that and think, for my money spent and for the engagement I got, I actually almost found it better than being in person. I really did, which is actually quite interesting. The part that I missed was actually being on a panel in front of 1,700 people in one of the, as I said, I've done quite a few times the work streams. So on one of the work streams. So I've presented on that quite often and on the main stage. So you do get a completely different feel, but we are also used to Zoom now. That I don't know what it would feel like to have to go all the way to Excel, which they say they're going to be doing next year, and be amongst all those people.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks a lot. I think, Keith, from your perspective as somebody who's closely involved with the administration of these type of things as well, what do you see as the advantages and disadvantages of such a hybrid system? And is that something you think we should work towards in future much more? Thoughts from your side, please.
I think hybrid systems will inevitably come in. I think COVID has taught us the benefit of these systems. I think companies are using hybrid systems for AGMs now. They're using them for all sorts of things. And I think they have genuine advantages. I think we've seen ourselves that using virtual systems has allowed us to engage with people that we haven't seen for many years. We've had a greater engagement with our membership because of hybrid systems and because of using the web. And as others have said, it's quite often that people can't attend for a short session in person, but they will be able to attend online. So I think hybrid systems are definitely the way to go. But as others have said, they have challenges. They aren't something you can just walk into a room and say, today we're going to have a hybrid meeting. You need to do the planning. You need to have the right IT equipment and the systems, and you need to give thought how that works. In my old company, we had hybrid meetings with a subsidiary in America quite often, and they sometimes work very well. But if you weren't careful, it's very easy to disenfranchise the person at the other end of the call. People in the room start having conversations amongst themselves. They use, things happen and people start laughing about in jokes, and the people at the other end of the call are completely out of the loop. And I think the most important thing there is to retrain chairmen as to how best to engage with people on the other ends of the calls, because you almost need to check in at them at regular times. You need to check in on that they understood, that they were, did they want to say anything? Were they, And that's a very different skill set for a chairman than just sitting around a table watching the body language. And as I said, I've seen some good ones. And as Sharon said, I've seen some appalling ones as well. So I think there's a lot of education that company secretaries can help with in terms of making sure these things work. But I'm firmly of the opinion that they will be here. And it's something that we as company secretaries need to engage with.
Sharon, you've done a lot of board training. Thoughts from you, and Rob, then perhaps from you.
I'm just going to respond on one thing that Keith said, and then I will answer your question. Keith, you talked about people becoming excluded because they're in a different medium to some of the other people. And one of the topics that was covered in the conference was mindful exclusion, mindful inclusion, where we are, due to our biases, that we exclude people. And there is a case of it's out of sight, out of mind. We forget that there's somebody else in the room, particularly in the days of the telephone dial-in, where people dial in by telephone, you completely forget there's somebody sitting on the call listening to you. So I think that is something that we're a lot more aware of today, is our body language, trying to be inclusive in our body language. And I think that is quite an important one. And your aspect around the general meeting, I think that is definitely, for the future, is a hybrid event, definitely. And to answer your question, Cobus, you were talking about board reporting or board evaluations. I wasn't quite sure which
Well, board training in particular.
Board training, sorry, my apologies.
I guess it would also speak to board evaluation. How effective is your board in a hybrid world?
I've done quite a few board evaluations where I've not met a soul yet. That's awful. Now, here I am evaluating people and I've not so much as shaken their hand. I've not been in the same room with them. This is the closest I've got to them. And it does take a very different engagement of mindset to be able to understand the person you've not met. And that is quite a challenging space to be in. Can you get the job done virtually? Yes, absolutely you can. Can you catch everything? I said, if you've got enough EQ and insight as an individual, I don't think the Zoom environment has undermined the quality of board evaluation. What one can do to try and counter that is to put out a small questionnaire as well, just to tease out things you're not sure have been, whether you've got it or not, or whether there's some dissenting views. So there are ways around one can do that. When we look at board training, I think that is just so critical. I'm busy writing a report for a client at the moment, and they don't do any board development. And if you look at, for example, financial services, they literally have board development every single board meeting, and they meet 12 times a year plus a strategy day. And here you've got a board that meets 4 times a year. Okay, it's a massive meeting, but they don't do any development work. And one of the things I was recommending is through the induction program and through the strategy program, that they could actually do some very quality board development on the job. So teach them to do strategy. They all look at strategy and they think it's a spreadsheet. We think, no, actually, no, strategy is not a spreadsheet. And trying to help them understand the blue skies thinking process of looking outwards and big before you come back down to the business plan. So board development is very critical to bring your directors to a common point and a common understanding, and aligned, as you said right in the beginning. I think it was you was talking about it was Rob talking about the purpose of the company. And getting them aligned to what is best practice, what is good governance, what is the purpose of the organization, why am I here, what's my fiduciary duty, what's the company's influence upon me. So I think board development, I've gone forever, I'm going to stop, is highly critical.
I think there's a couple of very interesting remarks in the comments section where David Buskell says hybrid meetings will increase member involvement. Many issues which member do not want to attend, and a hybrid meeting allows them to. Yeah. So it's absolutely much more inclusive system. Angela Caldara agrees. Hybrid meetings always used. We just use telephone. I think the benefit that we have nowadays is the fact that we can actually see each other. And there's always the question somebody said, you know, if the camera is off, you do wonder, is the person actually there? But there you go, that's on yourself. Rob, so any thoughts from you on the advantages, disadvantages of a virtual or a hybrid world?
Well, yeah, I'll try and keep my comments short. I know I've been doing some training with boards in Saudi Arabia, and because of COVID and not being able to travel, the boards have been more open to having online training. And having online development or training or learning and development, it's a different mindset completely and a different style that's approached than if you were doing online face-to-face facilitation. So you can't have the same impact when you go over to someone and ask them very specifically a question, and people are less likely to be distracted on face-to-face meetings because they won't be looking at their phone, or less likely to be looking at their phone or doing something else. So someone might be on the meeting or in the training and not necessarily present. And so it's how do you keep those individuals engaged? And that's quite a skill set in itself. And I think trainers have had to rethink about how they approach the interaction with their online audience to try and keep those people engaged. Having breakout rooms can work, but if you don't go to the breakout rooms, people end up talking about everything other than what they've been asked to speak or consider. So it's just managing those. But again, it's based on the individuals. If the individuals are tech savvy and have an appetite to learn, they'll learn regardless whether it's face-to-face or online. Board members, quite often people say people of an older generation don't understand technology. Well, I've actually seen the opposite, where younger directors are not so tech savvy, and it's the elder board members who are very up to speed with all forms of technology, whether it's iPads or analog or Mac or Windows, and fantastic. And you know, I think touching on what Sharon said, it's very important in regards, or somebody mentioned about the reskilling, maybe Keith, talking about the reskilling of the chairman and then the board secretary and the company secretary working with the chair to try and keep that dialogue when there's actual virtual or hybrid meetings. I remember quite some years ago having virtual meetings where people were dialing in by video conference, and that worked really well. It's better than telephone. I find that when people first started using virtual or hybrid meetings, quite often the person would introduce themselves, and by the time you've gone around the room, that's 20 minutes gone. So I think people need to just crack on and I'm present and just get onto the actual topic. But I think online meetings have stopped a lot of jibber jabber. People they really do focus on the items in the agenda, and they talk about them in more detail, which allows for quicker decision making and better information. Those are my main points.
There's definitely something to say for online meeting etiquette and how that speaks to culture, and how our culture and a hybrid world intertwines with each other. If you think about and one of my hobbies is commercial negotiations, if you think about the Hofstede principles of engaging with other people, you will find that different cultures react very differently in negotiations. And there's an analog to the boardroom there, where you have cultures which are highly emotional or emotive, but fairly low on physical contact, or vice versa. And you've got the whole spectrum. And I think we see the same in the boardroom nowadays, where when you're forced to integrate in a hybrid world, you need to be cognizant of how the person on the other side of the camera may react, how they will think. Do they experience a hybrid meeting as very dispersonal? It's actually not something that they engage with. So you, as a chairman or a company secretary, really have to tease them into the meeting? Or do you actually have to manage them because they are so excited to be on camera they kind of take over the meeting. So it's a brave new world out there. On the topic of climate change, Sharon, any thoughts on that which came through, climate change and then perhaps ESG topics?
The part that was interesting, and I've seen this coming through from the financial services regulator, the FCA as well, is an organization looks and says, but we don't burn carbon. We're just running a services business, for example, and or a mutual building society, or something. Then you think there's no logical ESG or climate change agenda attached to it, and yet the world has actually got to that point now where it actually reaches every single one of us. And I think it is company secretaries' responsibilities to gen up on this and to bring this to the board agenda, because it is something that is uncomfortable to a lot of people because they just don't know anything about it, and they feel, what I don't know about, I'd rather stay away from. So the importance of that, I think, came across in the conference because there were quite a few topics on climate change, but also on ESG, both being the environment, the social, and the governance aspect. And the other areas they came up with was the green agenda. That is also quite a topical part. And the other things that were covered at some point in one of the discussions was around the challenges that places like Africa and Asia have, where all their energy is coal-based. And you can't just shut off those coal power stations. South Africa knows that well. Every time it tries to shut it down, the whole country goes into darkness. They don't have the alternative feeds into the grids at a level that we might have in the Northern Hemisphere. So what are they going to do? They can't live without power for a period of time while they get wind and water and solar going. So there has to be a transition period, but they can't get funding for it. So this is the whole thing around the Paris Accord, and what is linked now to your COP26 activities is around getting infrastructure finance for things that are not carbon neutral. And I think there's going to be a big challenge for certain countries that are still, let's say, emerging economies or third world economies. And I think that's going to be one of the big challenges that wasn't addressed, but from my point of view, I think is the emerging risk. What are we going to do about that problem? So the community aspect was brought out as well quite clearly in the conversations, ensuring that the communities that you interact with, that you look after them. One of the things that happens typically when there's an infrastructure project and workers come in, is gender-based violence, raping, imbalancing the role plays that exist in that community, where the women are coming to do some of the work. There's the gender-based violence risk, and then you've got the rape risk. But over and above that is she's earning a salary for the first time. And that's creating a complete imbalance in the home environment. So the impact they have on the communities is horrendous, but positive, because they're empowering them. But they're empowering them on the standards we know, not the ones that they have and know. So it's the whole aspect around the community aspect, social side, the S of ESG, is ensuring that we are a lot more mindful of the extenuating circumstances we create as organizations going into communities. Most companies here talk about worrying about the local community and doing something around my home environment. Here you talk something where you're out in another country.
Definitely, yeah. And I think something you touch on is there's a growing realization in the board that there are actually different circles of influence that a board and a company has on its environment, obviously very closely to that board's activities, direct day-to-day work, and then your local community and even your international communities. So at least 3 circles that you can very quickly identify. Keith, if you could pick a couple of topics that you would suggest for a conference perhaps next year, what would you like to see on the agenda for 22?
Well, I think, as we said before, I think for next year, it's going to be what was the outcome of COVID. COVID's had a massive impact, and I think companies are going to have to deal with all sorts of issues about whether they're going to have all their staff back at work or whether they're going to have to engage with their staff over some sort of social media. How do you keep staff engaged and all those sorts of things? I think there are going to be issues around more people being made redundant simply because there may not be so many people working in London or places like that, which means that shops will close. There's going to be a whole change. And I think one of the things that it would be good to look at in a year's time is what actual impact COVID had and how it's impacted on us as business leaders. And how we address that. It's going to change the risk profile. It's going to change all sorts of things. How we use technology, how we engage with people, how we remunerate people. You know, we're not going to be paying London waiting. There's a whole raft of issues that crop up, which I think we need to sort of see how it goes through the year. But I think a sort of most State of the Union conference next year to look at how things have gone and all those new challenges and how we're going to address them will be really interesting.
Definitely. Thanks, Keith. Lorraine, what would be on your bucket list?
Thanks, Clovis. Well, I was just scribbling down there. One of the things I liked about this year was there were the technical updates. So we had some conversations around the BEIS consultation, which was just closed, and all the massive changes that might bring in. They flagged up the new consultation on the changes to the listing regime that's coming up. There were things around Companies House, things around managing all your subsidiary governance. So a lot of really good technical stuff to make sure we're all up to date with those. But those are good. But the things I find fascinating are the things around board diversity. So there were these series of reports that the Institute's done on mindful exclusion that Sharon mentioned earlier on. And, you know, and I heard about those before. I had not got a clue what mindful exclusion meant. But the reports you can pick up, I think, on the Institute website. There's a third one to come out. And it's those things around board dynamics, how boards work, and the sort of psychology of to how you can make them work better. And that's, you know, like Sharon, that's one of the things I do a lot in the day job. And so that's of huge interest to me. I'm particularly, I mean, board diversity, you often look at demographics, so whether it's gender or ethnicity, but I think something even more fascinating is cognitive diversity, avoiding groupthink and finding people with different life experience and different ways of thinking. That's something that fascinates me. So all of those sorts of topics I think are great, and I would certainly be turning up to those sessions if they're on next year.
And the importance of, I think touching on what you said, the importance of EQ and then the right of dissent in a board.
That was absolutely, and having this phrase psychological safety. Now, I'm not sure whether some of the boards I work with, the traditional directors, and you look at this and you think if you have spoke to them about that, whether they would either not have a clue what you're talking about, whether they would dismiss it all as gobbledygook. So the knack, I think, of the governance professional is taking that, which I think can be really valuable, but packaging it and influencing your board. There was the session Anna Bateson did on governance coaching, which was also good for people who've been around a while. You know, how do you bring those ideas and help your board be better in a way? It's influencing, particularly the chair and that relationship that you have with the chair, and help. And it's a journey for people. You can't just say, well, you're here and you've got to jump to here. It's taking them along that journey and not necessarily using the psychology jargon, the psycho speak. You know, they probably call it psychobabble. You've got to, you know, communicate it to them in ways that they can relate to. And I think that's a big challenge, but also a great opportunity for governance professionals, because making the board more effective is one of the best value adds you can give in your role.
Absolutely. Sharon, perhaps a quick question to you, and then I'd like to open the floor actually to all the attendees. As Genius Methods, you've been one of the main sponsors. What would you see was the value of the conference in 2021 for yourself? And looking to 22, what would you like to see in a bucket list or in a proposed agenda?
I think the value that you have of being present at these conferences is people don't like being sold to. They know you're there. They'll walk up to you or come into your virtual space at their choice. So there's no hard sell, there's no hard work, but you do get to be seen by other organizations. So I do see the value in that. And from my point of view, the consistency of being engaged in this conference over time is important. If I look to next year, what would I want to see? And I think the topic, and it's very linked to what, I can't remember if it was Keith or Lorraine, because you both covered the topic, was talking about wanting to understand what COVID has done. The lens I would like to look at COVID looking backwards from 2022 into what we've been through in 20 and 21 would be, what are now the risks that have arisen and are plaguing boards and good governance, and what might still be the emerging risks that haven't yet fully materialized, and how can we look into that unknown and ensure that we are being as mindful of not excluding risks, these are all people, and just opening our mind to the fact that this is bringing risks and a lot of people are just not aware, not ready, can't think of the unknown. And my biggest worry is what we don't know yet that's going to come out of this, either in behavior or culture or mental well-being, or ever being able to be social properly again. You know, there are a lot of things. And then of course we've got the work side. What are the risks that we've got that people have started making decisions they shouldn't be making? People are not filing things, or they're not using the cloud properly, not using their computers properly. Those are just simple things. I think there's some much bigger things where people are not, it's almost like we've all had a lobotomy. The peaks and troughs have been cut out and we're all sort of in this neutral space somewhere. And that in itself I see as a risk. So I would love to debate those things in a year's time.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think to all the attendees, open session, any thoughts, questions, observations about this year's Institute conference and perhaps what you see going forward? As long as you don't speak about the soccer, any topic goes. George.
Yeah, hi. Well done to the membership team. Excellent session today. Just a quick comment, I suppose, on what you were saying, Sharon. My son is doing a vac job with the firm of actuaries in Bristol, sorry. And he was telling me that it's the weirdest thing, because they've just gone back into the office now. And he was saying it's the weirdest thing because people will be sitting in the same office, but sending team messages to each other. You know, we've had this thing in the past where you would send your colleague an email who was sitting next door to you. Whereas now it seems to be people are sending these team messages and Zoom messages when they're sitting in the same room. So it is looking like we have forgotten how to communicate with each other. And it's going to take some time to get back into that. Just a general question, as somebody who was unfortunately unable to attend any part of the conference, and somebody who is in practice as a company secretary, a question for each of the panel members. Apart from ESG, which has been on the cards for a long time now, what is the one area, the one trend where you think I should go and have a look at to make my company secretarial practice better before next year's conference? So what is the one area where you would say, go and make sure you upskill yourself on it, go and have a look at it?
Rob, you first perhaps, and then Sharon. Keep it brief.
I'll keep it very brief. That's a very difficult question, to be honest. I think EQ, the softer skills, I think is the biggest thing in the arsenal of a company secretary or board secretary, and between now and next year, how do you keep those aspects, and how do you influence people at the board and at senior management without seeing them face to face, without being able to take them for a beer, without being able to go and get a coffee? It's a lot more difficult to have those, you know, off the record conversations over a Zoom call or aspects like that. So, you know, how can we use our negotiation skills, as Kuba said, use those skills and negotiate and try and influence people for the good, you know, good governance and trying to simplify things.
Sharon?
Thanks very much, Cobus. Just picking up on a comment made by Sinead on the chat line about how many directors have joined companies and not met a single other board member yet. Not even the companies, if they've been interviewed on Zoom, they've joined the board on Zoom. And one of the companies I've just worked with is sitting in that situation. 2 people have joined the board and don't know a soul. And they've never met anybody. So the challenges that brings is absolutely amazing, and how different human beings will respond to that challenge in different ways. But if I had to advise a company secretary on what is the thing you should be absolutely on, is very aligned to what Rob has just said now. I would give it another word: boardroom dynamics. Is understanding how the boardroom works, how decision-making can be influenced, how your chair is influenced, you know, bias, we all have bias, how we think, because we've got fast thinkers, slow thinkers, how we respond emotively, technically, practically. Yeah, we've got all these dimensions of cognitive differences between us, at least all the IQ and EQ. So the person who sees it in black and white and the person who sees it in, okay, I can work with this, I can blend with it, and how these different behaviors work. And position yourself as a company secretary as the trusted expert. Do you think of the fulcrum of a seesaw in the middle? If that fulcrum of the seesaw weren't working, you wouldn't have a seesaw. You would have 2 pieces of plank that are doing what they like, which is probably lying on the floor. So I see the company secretary as that middle point between differing parties, helping them to talk to each other, helping them to trust in talking to the company secretary to get an understanding to be a better director. So I see company secretaries having to upskill hugely in the EQ space, in the negotiation space, which we were talking about earlier, in the decision-making space, in the leadership space. I think there's a massive role for company secretaries to educate today's chairman into actually being decent chairs, because they don't know how to chair meetings quite often. And they equally don't know how to lead the board or how to be the critical friend to the CEO. So we have a lot of people who are very good finance directors who don't make good chairs. So I think that is a massive space for the company secretary of the years ahead.
Thanks, Sharon. David Locke, perhaps the final question or observation from you.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. In terms of board members not meeting each other since the 14th of June, 50% of my board is new and has not met each other. So I'm obviously thinking very carefully how to do that, and maybe we'll feed back to one of these occasions on what works, what doesn't. The point I want to make this morning is I think it has thrown up a huge opportunity for this company. I think something in the field of training chairs to manage hybrid meetings, what works, what doesn't, and so on. If we can equip chartered secretaries to do it, this could be a further distinctive offering of this company in the city. I think also, and I obviously speak with personal experience stroke challenge on this one, any way in which board members can be given an induction which specifically prepares them for the virtual and hybrid world. I think that would be a resource that could be widely available. And I completely take the point about needing to be sensitive. If you are in a room with people and there are also people taking part in the call from a distance. I did that about 10 years ago as part of the British Council's International Advisory Committee, and it worked. But it worked because we were all on the phone. We only had voices. We had to concentrate on the voices. But thanks for a really useful session this morning. This has sparked a number of thoughts which I think will be helpful.
I think, unfortunately, we are out of time. David, thank you very much. Great comment. We look forward to hearing from your experience. I think there's definitely a being sensitive to your own company's needs and then being sensitive to the newcomers in the room. So I think all around the EQ focus will definitely be a key topic for everybody, and would be great to get together in 6 months again and see what we think, how the board environment has developed in that space. So everybody, thank you very much, and thank you very much again to all the panel members. Rob, thanks for attending. You're in a different time zone than the UK, so hopefully you're standing closer to an evening drink. Sharon, your day is just starting. Lorraine, yours as well. Thank you very much. And Keith, as always, great session. Thanks a lot. And to Karen as well, who did the administration behind the scenes. And I think a huge shout out to the committee and the panel. Thank you very much.
And a big thank you to our Master of Ceremonies, Facilitator, Chairman, whatever we get called these days when you're doing the role you've done. Cobus, that was a magical management of the people in the room and of us as a panel. Thank you very much for your efforts.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the weekend ahead.